So now, today's gospel, where a very, very familiar story where there's a lot of opportunities for us to kind of put ourselves in the place of the different characters to reflect upon some struggles that may be going on in our own hearts. The first thing, we got to set up the context here. There is great evidence that this whole thing, we know that the Pharisees and the scribes had set this up in order to test Jesus, but the depth with which they set this up is quite alarming. There's something off about the situation. The fact that they're in the temple area with this woman, and their accusation is very peculiar. It's not that she is a known adulterer. We know her to be an adulterer or a prostitute, yet we caught her in the very act of adultery. That in itself is strange, but then where is the man? Because by the law, they both would have been subject to the same penalty, and yet he is absolutely absent from the scene. So scholars, they've wondered, was this woman, perhaps she is known to be a prostitute or something, but was she hired in order to be put into this position, or did they simply just wait in order to trap Jesus? The other thing about it is where it's taking place within the temple walls. Now, the Romans, in order to keep public order, they weren't allowed within the temple. So what they would do is they would set up a fortress, a headquarters, right next to the temples, right outside of the walls, and they would build their lookout points, their towers, higher than the walls for the very reason of being able to look down into the place that they couldn't go. So the scribes and the Pharisees know that not only are they going to try to trap Jesus with the law, they know that the Romans are watching and waiting so that they can turn around and say, hey, we got a problem down here. This is the gravity. So this is our first reflection of what happens when we judge others, right? When we literally look down upon our brothers and sisters, waiting to trap them, waiting for them to mess up, right? So distant from the actual situation that we're too far to see, to notice, to hear the conversation that may be taking place between them very intimately when it involves their vulnerabilities and their sins, that personal conversation that may be taking place in their life with Christ, inviting them to conversion, while we stand afar off and judge their situation. This is the danger that the scribes and Pharisees set up, and it's one that is all too easy for us to be caught up in our relationships. And so, what exactly is the trap then that the Pharisees are setting up for Jesus? We know that she has sinned against the law through this adultery, and the law says she must be stoned to death. And so what do you say, Jesus? Now, the problem that they've put Jesus into, as they think that they have him trapped in a no-win situation, is, with the Romans watching, if Jesus affirms the law, then they can turn around and say, this man just told us to carry out capital punishment, which we know we're not allowed to do unless the Romans are involved. So he's going against Roman law. He's guilty. He needs to be arrested. And their problem is solved. But if he doesn't say that and say, you're absolutely right, the Mosaic law says she has to be put to death, right? Now not only is he stuck with the Romans, right? Anything else, if he says no, now he's going against their own Mosaic law, and there's a penalty for that. And it says instead he got down on the ground and he started writing in the sand with his finger. I can't wait to ask him what he was writing, because it had a big impact. what they believe it was. When is the other time that we heard the finger of God writing something out? The law, the 10 Commandments, the finger of God himself inscribed the commandments on the stone tablets. And so scholars believe that what Jesus did was he got down in the sand and started writing out Mosaic law by the finger of God, because he is God. Jesus uses his finger and he starts perhaps writing the law in the sand that they themselves had been violating, so that they can then read it and know of the penalty that they would be guilty of if anybody had pointed it out against them. And this makes sense, because it was the elders who were the first ones to drop their stones and walk away. The elders who would have been very versed, familiar with Jewish writings, familiar with the law. Unfortunately, we can't believe that the reason that they put their stones down is because they were so moved by Christ's mercy and they experienced a conversion that they changed their minds. They walked away because they knew that they had lost. Christ himself is on public record as as calling them the greatest sinners. And so when he simply turns to them and says, "Let the one among you without sin cast the first stone," everybody has heard him calling them sinners. There's no way that they can convince the Romans that Jesus was the one who started this fight. And so it's after everyone walks away, he waits until he is alone with the sinner. And that's when he turns to her and says, "Is there no one here to condemn you?" She acknowledges, "No one, sir." And then the very, very profound truth about the mercy of Jesus Christ, "Neither do I condemn you." And then the call to conversion. So go and do not sin. St. Paul, in his letter, talks about this experience of hearing Christ say to us, "I know very well what you have done. I know everything about you, but I do not condemn you," in order to give you room in the future. When we pair this with his other teaching, how many times are we going to be forgiven? 7 times 77. In other words, a perfect amount that gives you room for perfection, no matter how long it takes. St. Paul, going back to his letter, where he says, "I know where I have come from. I know what I had. I give it all up." What is it that he gave up? Well, his appeal to the law. St. Paul was perhaps one of the most righteous according to the law in the community, such that he would have been justified by the law by all of the people that he was putting to death before his conversion. But he does not despair in what he has done. He has great hope because he continues to say, "I just continue to look forward to what I could have, knowing that I don't have it yet, but I am on my way to obtaining it." And then he says something that's very critical for all of us in dealing with our sins, especially when it comes to dealing with regret and guilt for our sins. He says, "I am forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead." And this was Christ's message to the woman. It's Christ's message to all of us. This is that time that I talk again about Catholic guilt. The thing that the rest of the world wants to hold over us is something that is a burden, a strain that the church imposes. But I say to you, the experience of guilt is a good thing. And it's not meant to last. Why is guilt good? Guilt is that sentiment, that feeling, that recognition that what I have done was wrong. And it hurt somebody, or it hurt me. And it hurt God. And so when we do something and we feel bad for it and we recognize that as guilt, that is an indication that you're a good person and that your heart is in the right place. And we can prove that by considering the opposite. If you do something bad that harms you or someone else, and it's against the will of God, and you don't feel bad because of that, in other words, you don't feel any guilt, well, now are you a good person? I dare say not. There's something missing in your conscience. So guilt shows us we are good. But then what do we do with that guilt? When we recognize, if I had to go back and do it differently, I would, it proves, again, that if you were faced with the same situation today, you would want it to turn out differently. That means that you're different than you were back then. It means you're a different person. We have a word for that. It's called conversion, the whole point of the Christian journey. So it's not fair for you to judge yourself today based on who you were in the past. Oftentimes, it's so much easier for us to forgive others, or even to allow Christ to forgive us, to accept his mercy, but then we continue to go through life not forgiving ourselves. And today, it's time to let that go too. To hear the words that were spoken to the woman when it comes to our sins. Neither do I condemn you. Now, let's forget. Let's forget what moves us away from God, and let's always remember what continues to draw us close to him. Some of the most powerful words, meaningful words in our celebration of the Eucharist. Do this in remembrance of me. This is the part I want you to remember. How he saves us, the very reason why we can forget and move on. We have just a few more weeks of Lent. I encourage you once again, take stock, kind of go through how are your practices going, how are your sacrifices doing right now, and then let's look forward to the next 2 weeks. A good and holy Lent, a successful Lent, is one where you are ending somewhere better, somewhere closer to Christ than when you began. Christ does not condemn us. Let us continue to accept his mercy and forgiveness.